Hello everybody and good morning. Here we are for our final installment of Psych and Law. For today, I'm going to ask the question, not necessarily try to answer it, but present a bunch of information around it at least so you can answer it. Does the term evil belong in forensic psychology? And if we hearken all the way back to when we were talking about the insanity defense, remember that evil is kind of one of the three choices. Either I understand the nature of the crime and I can detect that there was some gain available to it, or I can subscribe to an evil motive in explaining the crime, or finally, short of profit or evil, then we're kind of left with the insanity plea. So now we're going to talk about evil, and evil is a strange term because when we talk evil, are we leaving scientists behind and becoming metaphysicians? And if so, then are we no longer playing forensic psychology? And that becomes, kind of a crazy issue. So this lecture, I'm going to talk some, but then I'm going to show a lot of videos throughout to kind of investigate this idea. So it's going to be kind of long. I'll warn you right off the bat. And often this lecture is not given in class because we run out of time towards the end of the semester. So what is evil? Well, if we look at a psychodynamic definition, evil is the impulse to malevolent destruction that arises from evil associated with dread turned outward. So this very psychodynamic, very Freudian kind of idea is that the thanatos, death instinct, right, causes us this internal pain, and as a defense mechanism we turn it outward in the form of aggression towards others. It's probably not a very good definition when you get right down to it. If we take a behavioral definition, then we might end up with acts that by their very nature appear to deliberately savage, such as they defy attempts at rational explanation. And why did they do that? Well, if there's no rational explanation, usually generating some kind of gain or profit, some kind of instrumental aggression, then we fall back on the term evil. A clinical forensic definition, we're talking about people who commit breathtaking acts, who do so repeatedly and know what they're doing, and they're doing it in peacetime. So Dr. Stone kind of eliminates the idea of what happens in wartime because kind of all bets are off. And there's a lot of kind of social, psychologically oriented people that might go along with that. And are there evil times? And Stone includes peacetime in that qualification. And Lifton offers us the case of Joseph Mengele. In ordinary times, he could have been a slightly sadistic German professor, but given the opportunity to be, assigned to Auschwitz, right, and have no constraints whatsoever on his behavior, we can see that Stone's evil becomes full blown at that time. Reber, discusses in his book Manufacturing Social Distress that we're increasingly developing a society culture where psychopaths thrive. And I think over the last 3-4 years, if that's not become increasingly obvious, I don't know what has, right? People seem to turn their back on the law and kind of brag in so doing. So the diagnosis of evil, because if we're looking at forensic psychologists and diagnosis is one of the activities in which a forensic psychologist engages, well, what do we have then? 100 years ago, moral insanity was kind of a pretty good term, It really does kind of capture the flavor. This is not of morality to the point of being insane. An oldie but a goodie is trying to make a resurgence in sociopathy. We've talked about psychopathy, we've talked about sociopathy, we've talked about antisocial personality disorder. And I was trying to make a case for sociopathy as socialization into psychopathy a la Stout. Today we're a bit more refined, that is maybe a bit more scientific, if you will. So we have antisocial personality disorder that is determined on strict behavioral criteria, as all DSM disorders seek to be. We have psychopathy as a measure, both Hare and the Psychopathy Youth Inventory out of California, so it can be assessed in adults very successfully and reliably, a little less successfully or reliably in juveniles, and there's still a great deal of argument about testing juveniles and labeling juveniles as psychopaths. We have the special case of sexually violent predators, which certainly kind of falls easily into the definition of evil in most cases, and certainly brings up that imagery. Further classification systems are being introduced and will continue to be introduced, right? So Dr. Stone has a scale of evil. We'll look at how that's comprised here in a little bit. And the depravity scale, which was the cornerstone of your extra credit assignment, right? So I hope that you participated and helped out Dr. Wellner and his team on the depravity scale research. So let's go back to the sociopath. Like as we talked about earlier, you're not going to find the sociopath in the DSM. You're not going to find it in the official psychiatric nomenclature. Lycan distinguishes the sociopath and the psychopath in that the sociopath is socialized into psychopathy while the psychopath is born that way. And I think that gives us a real impetus to create and build an official diagnosis of sociopath, because it's two very different things then at that point. And we talked about Stout, and she said, look, to qualify as a sociopath, take any of these three, which makes it a pretty broad criteria, right? Egocentricity, callousness, impulsivity, conscience defect, that's an old term, that's a great one, people who don't necessarily feel or experience guilt, exaggerated sexuality, excessive boasting, risk-taking, inability to resist temptation, right? Someone who's antagonistic, deprecating attitude towards the opposite sex, and lack of interest in bonding with a mate. So take any of the three, and then, based on those three, Stout suggests that we can then develop 4 subtypes of sociopathy. And you have the commons, characterized by their lack of conscience, right? Then she describes the alienated by their inability to love or be loved. Right? And notice how you can really understand how these might have been socialized that doesn't require a genetic component necessarily. The aggressives by consistent sadistic streak. And we notice that sadism, quite often what we see is people escalate the level of sadism, so they start at sadism light and go into full-blown sadism. Not for everyone, but in some cases, right? And then the disocials, and these are folks that can't abide by the normative rules and join groups where other rules are advanced and they follow those rules. Notice they're still rule followers, but it just depends. Those rules are usually counter to the mainstream, the ones that they'll follow. The behavioral assessment of ASPD, right, we talked about, I'm not going to belabor this. You have these indicators, right, and so you can go on down the list. Again, we've talked about these. The idea of the DSM is that they're strictly observable behavioral criteria, and that really enhances the reliability of diagnosis. So take a look at those, if you will. And what do we know about treating ASPD? We're going to talk quite a bit about some treatments here throughout this last time together. The typically cognitive behavioral, right? And you might teach people to do a cost-benefit analysis. That is, this is what you're doing, but it's not paying off for you. So we try to make that clear. Here are the benefits, which are typically short-term and relatively minor, and then you contrast that to the costs, which can be quite severe, especially as we enter into a crime control model and we lengthen sentences. The idea is to increase the costs. Are people processing them at all, or do they know how to process them? Okay. Long-term thinking orientation, again, this is in part what we just talked about. That is thinking ahead and thinking in the long term, not in the immediate. So do you really want to steal this item that's in front of you when the consequence over time can be quite severe? Okay. Empathy training is one way that is often taught to people so that they can better understand the impact of what they do on the victims in society. This one, though, is a touchy subject in psychopathy. Empathy training often makes them more dangerous because they learn then tools to manipulate people better. Anger management training is common for people who have impulse control and anger issues, right? Replacement skill training. So sometimes it's a feature, this is what I do because I don't necessarily know any better or am not capable of any better. And with that being said, I want us to take a look at someone and say, we can ask the question, and we're not really in a position to diagnose because we don't have case history, etc. But to illustrate the difficulty when we're deciding, is this person crazy? That is, insane in the eyes of the law? Are they a sociopath? Are they a psychopath? Is it a more mild diagnosis of antisocial personality disorder? What's the story? And sometimes this can be difficult to understand and to evaluate. So I'm going to give us some cases that kind of test the borders. I like to do that. I want to show you a clip of an interview with Elaine Wuornos. And Elaine Wuornos, strange story. What we're talking about is perhaps a woman that was engaged in drug use and prostitution, and at some point she killed one of her Johns. And now the question is she repeatedly going out and now seeking out Johns to kill because she stacks up a bunch of murders? Let's see what she has to say about her criminal history. And this is an interview that was conducted on the day before she's to be put to death. So she is on death row, and this is, essentially some of her last words spoken on this planet. So let's go ahead and check this out. And I pull these off of YouTube, where there's a huge number of similar videos, if this is the kind of thing that interests you. So let's hang out with Elaine Wuornos for just a little bit here. Let's get the video rolling.
I'm just wondering how you're going to be, at 9:30 tomorrow morning. Are you prepared?
I'm prepared. I'm all right. I'm all right with it.
How?
I'm all right with it, but like I said, remember and let them know that I know that the cops knew who I was. After Richard Mallory died, I left prints everywhere, and they covered it up. And let me kill the rest of those guys to turn me into a serial killer. I know they did, because I was no professional serial killer or anything, murderer, or whatever you want to call it. Wasn't professional at what I was doing.
Eileen,
did some sloppy work,
How have you prepared yourself for tomorrow morning?
I'm all right with it. I'm ready to go. Hey, I was tortured at BCI. They had the intercom on in the room, and they kept lying that it wasn't on, and they were using sonic pressure on my head since 1997.
Sonic pressure?
And every time I was trying to write something, I think they had some kind of eye in the cell, I'm not sure, but every time I started writing something, it went up higher. So I'm thinking that probably had the TV rigged. The TV or the mirror, something was rigged. They got a huge satellite on the compound. After they put the huge satellite on the compound, it could have been either rigged to the TV set or the mirror or something, because the electrician, when he put the mirror on the wall, he says, doesn't that look like a computer? The back of it, and he stuck it to the wall.
And do you think, did that affect your mind, do you think?
Huh?
Did that affect your mind in some way, the sonic?
It was crushing my head, and they were using sonic pressure continually. Then when I had 3 meetings with Miss Villacorta on it, every meeting I had, she increased the pressure of the volume of the comm, increased the harassment on the floor, increased the trays being inedible, just increased every bit of my complaints, and trashed all grievances. They're trying to make it look like I was crazy at all times, rig up the room with torture. If I said anything about I think their whole plan was trying to make it look like I was totally crazy, and so nobody would believe anything I had to say about anything, and then drive me there if they could. I suffered so bad. I was really struggling to survive. Had a lot of trays that were attempted murder and everything. I had to wash all my food off. Then one day I didn't wash my food off, and I was sick for 3 weeks, almost died.
But you're okay now?
I'm okay. I'm okay. God is going to be there. Jesus Christ is going to be there. All the angels and everything. And, whatever's on the beyond. I think it's going to be more like Star Trek, beaming me up into a space vehicle, man. Then I move on, recolonize to another planet or whatever. But it's whatever's beyond. I know it's going to be good, because I didn't do anything as wrong as they said. I did the right thing. And I saved a lot of people's butts from getting hurt and raped and killed too.
So are you saying that you killed in self-defense or in cold blood? Because you changed your story. I'm just trying to...
What are you talking about? Change story on what?
No, about whether it was self-defense or not.
I'm not going to say it. You know, I'm not going to get into depth about my cases, Nick. I'm on my way to the chamber. Nothing stopping it. You can believe it or you don't have to believe it. That's up to you, man. Put a big question mark on your film.
What more is there to say about the cops? What more do you want to say about the cops?
A lot of stuff. Did you know that they were surveilling me before I killed? And then I knew it? And that it was covered up? Did you know there was helicopters dropping down from the sky, deputy sheriff, with decoys picking me up 4 or 5 months before my arrest? It was covered up?
But nonetheless,
Nobody ever asked me these
whether
questions.
the cops were following you or not, I think.
Oh, whether the cops were following me or not, Eileen, what?
Let's say the cops were following you.
Yeah.
Let's say they were following you and they did everything that you're saying they did. Nonetheless, you killed 7 men.
Yes, you
and
did.
I'm asking you, what got you to kill the 7
And
men?
I'm telling you because the cops let me keep killing them, Nick. Don't you get it?
Not everybody is killing 7 people. So there must have been something in you that was getting you to do
Oh, you
that.
are lost, Nick.
So
I was a hitchhiking hooker.
Right.
Running into trouble. I shoot the guy if I ran into trouble. Physical trouble. The cops knew it. When the physical trouble came along, let her clean the streets, and then we'll pull her in.
But
That's
how come
why.
there was so much physical trouble? Because it was all in 1 year. 7 people in 1
Oh
year.
well. Oh well.
But why not say now?
Because I'm out of retaliation for taking my life like this and getting rich off it all these years in total pathological lying. Yeah, thanks a lot. I lost my fucking life because of it. Couldn't even get a fair trial. Couldn't even get a fair investigation or nothing. Couldn't even have my appeals right. You sabotaged my ass, society, and the cops, and the system. A raped woman got executed. It was used for books and movies and shit. Bladder climbs, the election, everything else. I got a big finger in all your faces. Thanks a lot. You're inhuman. You're an inhumane bunch of fucking living bastards and bitches. And you're going to get your asses nuked in the end. And pretty soon it's coming. 2019, a rock's supposed to hit you anyhow. You're all going to get nuked. You don't take fucking human life like this and just sabotage and rip it apart like Jesus on the cross. And say, thanks a lot for all the fucking money I made off of you. And not care about a human being and the truth being told. Now I know what Jesus was going through. They've been trying to tell the truth. And I keep getting it stepped on. Concerned about if I was raped, I'm not giving you book and movie info. I'm giving you info for investigations and stuff, and that's it. We're going to have to cut this interview, Nick. I'm not going to go into any more detail. I'm leaving. I'm glad. Thanks a lot, society, for railroading my ass. Okay, let's go.
It was really pretty incredible that Eileen had just sailed through the psychiatric test the day before. It makes you wonder what you'd have to do to fail.
Well, how about that? What can we say about that? So are we talking someone who is insane in the eyes of the law? Not so much, right? She could have offered an insanity defense. Does she see herself in a heroic term? It appears so, that she was cleaning up the streets. We have the, is it paranoid to think that police are following you with helicopters and dropping out of the sky? Elaine Wuornos presents a very confusing picture as we look at this. It's almost incomprehensible to know what the truth was or how to understand it. And like I said, I like to show you extreme examples. So are we talking evil? Are we talking crazy? Are we talking some combination of the two? Are we talking a victim of society who was sacrificed? And is this really sociopathy, psychopathy? We know that psychopathy in women is very rare, much more common in men. But then I did a project with the Psychology Club one evening, and we came to the conclusion kind of universally that in working with the psychopathy measuring the criteria that it really is designed for men and not for women. So it may only detect psychopathy as a male construct because that's the way it was written and not necessarily a female construct. So there's so much to be done and so much to learn about offenders and how they become offenders, how they need to be treated, how they view the world, how are they classified, all of these components. And when we watch Eileen Wuornos, in her own words, we're left with almost probably greater confusion than clarity. Right? So is the psychopath then pure evil? That among us the most devastating features of psychopathy are a callous disregard of the rights of others, a propensity for predatory and violent behaviors, and certainly Elaine Wuornos demonstrates those. Without remorse, which she doesn't demonstrate either, psychopaths charm and exploit others for their own gain. But was there a gain here? Not necessarily. They lack empathy and a sense of responsibility, and they manipulate, lie, and con others with no regard to anyone else's feelings. So let's stop here with Hare's statement, and we'll pick up with part 2 here in just a moment.